Hello, welcome to the Women Fantasy Authors YouTube channel. I'm your host, Janet Hinker, and my guest today is D Lambert. Good morning, Dee.
Good morning. Hi, thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
nice to meet you. Um, I've just finished reading an advanced reader's copy of your soon-to-be released novel, His Last Name. But before we talk about that, I'd like to hear a little bit about who you are and what you do for a living.
Yeah, I get that one a lot. I'm actually a veterinarian, so I have a very science-based brain that I use every day in my day job. But writing's what I do to sort of stay sane, and give the other part of my brain a chance to go out and play. So I came from a science biology family. What I do for a hobby is a little bit out there.
I love it. And I know you've talked about this on your webpage a little bit, but how does being a veterinarian change how you approach writing about animals in fantasy?
Well, I'm super conscious of accuracy, and it's not just animal depictions, also just medicine in general, the science of it. I really like my fantasy to be as real as I can, if that makes any sense. We're going to possibly have a photo bomb because I have a cat now. Hello. Um, but anyway, we all have those things that will kick us out of a story. When
Yeah.
you read it and you just get those details, if the author gets those details wrong, all of a sudden it's really jarring if you know that stuff. So for me, I put all my animal depictions very realistic. I have the right body language. I've got the right terminology in there, and the medicine as well. I want to make sure that it's as real, so you're grounded in the stories.
Right. I think that comes through. So go to Dee's webpage and watch her clip on her thoughts about can dragons really fly based on their physiology. It's great. I loved it. We're not going to talk about it now, but go to her website and check it out. Getting back to His Last Name, I fell in love with Shimmer in the first chapter, but it took me a while to warm up to Kettlebolt. These are the two main characters. Tell us about these two characters and what service they are providing to the king.
Yeah, Shimmer's also one of my favorites. She's that real free spirit that's trying to fit into a kind of more normal life, but she just can't stand it. I actually first met her in book two of the Son of No Man series, which is my other completed series. In book Celebrant, she's an apothecary and a dancer, and the biggest extrovert, extremely social. But at the time of His Last Name, she's actually completing a 2-year apprenticeship under Master Kittable, who's the world's best wizard. And Master Kittable is responsible for regulating magic in the kingdom, in the newly fledged kingdom of Espar under King Thomas. So the two of them are keeping other wizards in check. In this world, magic's pretty rare, so there's not a ton of wizards, which make them super important.
Right. So as the story goes along, fairly early on, we find out that the king is going mad, and it appears that something called untouchable magic in his sword might be the problem. So who wants his kingdom to fail and why?
The short answers to that, a lot of people. I had a lot of fun with that in those untouchable concepts. Because Kittable and Shimmer are wizards and they use wizard magic. They use something called the spiral, which they can pull in different elements and domains of power and then form them into a regimented spell. It's a bit like computer code. It's very structured. Untouchable magic, on the other side, is the antithesis of that. It's a flowing dream-based magic that can destroy wizard magic just by being in contact with it. Untouchables don't train, they just manifest a rather kind of uncodified version of powers, making them very unpredictable. Although the rules of what the magic can and can't do are pretty similar. Um, Now, as to the question about the king's going mad and who wants the kingdom to fail, tons and tons and tons of people. King Thomas has barely got Espar together. That's actually the series, the Son of No Man series, covers the establishment of the kingdom of Espar. And there's a lot of people who were kind of better off, at least in their minds, before that happened, before he's forced that cooperation. There's also a pretty nasty spirit in the king's magical sword that really wants him dead for a variety of reasons, and he doesn't know it. And if you want a full explanation of that, you've got to read the full Son of No Man series, because the last book, Trader, really sets that up.
Yeah. I mean, you already touched on this a little bit. There's the two different types of magic uh, used by Kittable and Shimmer versus the untouchable. And well, let's see. Let's talk a little bit about the intricacies of that when wizards are fighting, because there's a wide assortment of spells, and Kittable's a master wizard, so he uses all of them, and he also invented a spell So I was intrigued by that. Tell me about how that spell he invented works, because it was unusual to what I think of normal magic systems in fantasy.
Yeah, so Kinnable had the honor of inventing what's called a contingency spell. So before Kinnable came around, because magic had to be pulled in from the spiral, like I kind of touched on, and formed into these spells with a strict sequence of words, spellcasting was always like really long and complicated. And the more complicated and powerful the spell, the longer and more complicated it was to put together, which made it slow. So these incredibly powerful magics were restricted by how fast you could do them, which meant most spells, most magic in those times were very short and very pinpointed, kind of sloppy magic. Now, what Kinnable did is he figured out a code effectively to tie a contingency to any spell. So what he could do is do all that casting beforehand, make those really big, powerful spells, and then tie them to a single word or a single trigger. And it could be anything from, it could be a word, it could be a gesture, it could be a circumstance, and it would then trigger the spell, which made him incredibly powerful very, very quickly, because instead of having to cast slowly, he could cast with just a word. He did eventually share this information with everyone, but it wasn't before an awful lot of people tried to take him out, and he made himself one hell of a reputation as a result.
Yeah, he does. He is. And it makes the battle scenes, normally in fantasy, you've got wizards throwing bolts of magic at each other, and it's very scripted. It's very what you would expect. But when you're in your scenes, there's all this stuff going off at different times, and it made the battle scenes really interesting, I thought. So I love how you did that. There's also a very interesting twist in the story that finds several of the characters wandering around in a dream world. And there's magic there and beings and dead people. So how would you describe it? And what gave you the idea to have some of the story play out in this interesting dreamscape? And how does it work?
So the dream world, yeah, I made the dream world. Actually, I made it for a different book, interestingly, but because they're all set in the same universe, it pulled into this one as well. And the dream world is where untouchables get their power from. Because they're fairly intuitive casters, they don't fully understand what they're doing, but the dream world is in fact where they draw their magic from. Actually, I'm going to be touching more on it in another book coming up, which is kind of exciting. I don't know if it's going to be next year or the year after, but I've got a series of 2 coming out where you have a very powerful untouchable or dreamer magic user who taps in it a fair bit until you see that used a lot. So it's a golden world. It's kind of a separate plane of existence. It exists where we're connecting the mind to the dreams. And it's only certain people, and in this case, most regular people, who can tap into this, because when you're dreaming, that's where you are. And if you can channel that power, you can then become one of these dreamers or untouchable casters. So I kind of needed something like that in this story, because Kinnable was very powerful, or is very powerful, and Shimmer in her own right is extremely powerful as well. She's creative in how she approaches it, but she is very potent. And I realized halfway through that I really had to hamstring Kinnable. Like, I needed to weaken him. He can't be this powerful. So he had to really lose everything to kind of understand how much things mattered to him.
Yeah,
And in
yeah.
taking away his magic, that's what I did. So that's where that concept came from.
Yeah, and so the cord the cord that comes out from that's connected to people, that's for dreamers to be able to follow back out to the
Yeah,
real
connects the
world, to their
body, because there's
body. Yeah,
the body, the mind, and the spirit.
yeah.
And Dream World allows the mind and the spirit to somewhat detach, whereas the
Yeah.
body stays in the material plane. In Wizards, they tend to use their mind, not their spirit, but Dreamers tend to use their spirit, not their mind.
Wow.
Although
Okay.
sometimes they have to use them together, where Kinnable ends up in an awful lot of trouble.
Yeah. So yeah, again, great, interesting magical system that was unique, and I love that part. Let's go back to Shimmer. She has a very interesting past. Like I said, she's my favorite character. I loved
Yeah,
her.
me too.
So tell us about her back, a little bit of her backstory, and how she uses different characters in different situations, and how her past helps her to survive, what she's using to survive now.
Yeah, so before she actually ended up apprenticed with Kettlebell, Shimmer grew up on the road with her father, and yes, single dad, as part of like a traveling show and apothecary. She's probably honestly the smartest character. As powerful as Kittable is, she's probably got a much better, like she's much smarter. But she's all self-taught. So she basically learned how to read and then read everything, and that's how she learned her magic was through books largely. Because of her history, she's in a very vulnerable position being a woman on the road, especially since she's a dancer. So she's in the public eye. She's very has to do a lot of performances. So she developed this strategy of changing her personality depending on who she's dealing with and what best suits the circumstances. So she actually has different names for her different personas that she plays, depending on where she's at. And she can vary. She can be tough and confident, and she'll, just tell you what's what. She can be meek and demure if she has to be, if she thinks it'll play the situation better. Or she can be cross and just brawny if she has to be, and she fit in a pub and just, throwing back drinks. There's a whole theme throughout it as to which one is actually her, which one is real, because she plays each of those ones so well.
Yeah, that's true. I was wondering that. And of course, by the end of the story, it's pretty clear who the real person
Who's
is.
really, yeah, who is the real Shimmer?
Yeah, and she's powerful. She's powerful. I love that about her. Now, I didn't mention at the beginning that this is obviously high fantasy and a romance, although the action really drives the story. But we're talking about a developing relationship throughout all this drama between Kittable and Shimmer. And her love and devotion for him, he was her mentor. So that her feelings for him developed over a long period of time. At least that's how it seemed to me. So she's feeling it and not really saying anything. And why is Kittable seem so resistant to acknowledging his feelings for her?
I had to ask myself that a lot when I was writing them, because as I said, she came up in book 2 of the series, and then all the way through they do this back and forth, and I had to write his last name to help them just sort themselves out, because they had constantly been back and forth. There's definitely like Shimmer, the moment she spotted Kittable, knew who he was. She already knew his reputation. She was somewhat smitten. She had a crush instantly, and that just got developed more and more. So she invested. Kittable, because of his history, because he's always been under fire, because other wizards are typically out to get him, because of his, because of his reputation more than anything, and then because of his role as policing wizards, he's always the bad guy to pretty much every wizard that he meets. So another caster is a threat to him. He's never had an apprentice before. He made one exception, and that was for Shimmer. And because she was so brilliant and he thought there was real potential, that he wanted to give her a chance. But he's just been on his own for so long, that he was really hesitant to let anyone get close to it. The other part of it is he is socially awkward. He grew up in mostly isolation. Yeah, he just didn't play well with others, as we put it. He doesn't understand people, largely speaking, and so partly he's somewhat oblivious, which it makes it harder for him to come to grips with his own situation. And like I said, he kind of had to lose it all to suddenly realize how important certain things were to him.
Yes, he comes across as very gruff and uncaring originally in the story, and then you learn his backstory, and it starts making more sense. And then you start seeing the little glimpses of his caring for her beyond being her teacher, obviously caring about her because he worked with her for so many years.
I mean, that definitely holds him back as well. There is that professional distance that he has to maintain. Once he's the mentor, like once he's the master wizard teaching the apprentice, he can't make moves. There's no way he would advance on anything, because it would be completely unacceptable and put her in an unfortunate position. So he would never do that, which causes more stress.
He's a very honorable man. Shimmer's more of the rebel renegade. So it's a fun blend. It's a fun.
Their dynamic was just fun all the way through, and then his last name was just the cherry on top. I loved it.
Now, setting the romance aside for a second, they are in the midst of all of this. They are fighting a very formidable enemy. So tell us who Tamar is, why he's so dangerous, and what he's striving to accomplish.
All right, so Tamar, again, trying to find I needed a worthy opponent. And so Tamar is a fanatic, and that is terrifying in of itself. He's also an untouchable, so he's a dreamer. He's an untouchable, and he somewhat understands his powers, so he knows how to use them, which makes him incredibly formidable, especially versus a wizard, because wizard magic simply cannot function in a dreamer. He also knows more about Kittable's past than pretty much anybody else, because Kittable, as I said, was mostly isolation, and nobody knows where he came from or why. He just showed up one day, basically, when he was 13, and then was this incredible wizard. But Tamart knows the truth, and he is absolutely willing
Wow.
to use it against Kittable. And just as a small spoiler, um, he's got a big backer as well. Now you finish the book, you know that there's a big backer
Yes.
that's also put Tamort up to some of this. So this makes it all the more difficult. We have different layers of opposition, basically trying to take Kittable out because he has been part of this larger change in the kingdom or the establishment of the kingdom. And these are the people who want the kingdom to fail. And to do so, they need to take Kittable out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So let's see what else. The fantasy, the whole, it was the romance part. I mean, I keep going back to that, the romance, because I don't like stories that are all about the romance. I need the action adventure, the big arcing theme, and you did that beautifully. So I want people to know that that they're going to get that in huge major with this book, along with this wonderful blooming of the relationship between these two characters. So I want to emphasize that. What do you think was the hardest part about writing the story? Because it's pretty complicated with all the moving parts. What was the hardest part of pulling this story together?
Well, being that I tend to gravitate towards epic fantasy, complicated is status quo. But no, the hardest part for me writing it, I'm a pantser. For those who don't know, it's the style of how you write. If you just kind of fly by the seat of your pants, just write as it comes, or do you plot it, like plan it out kind of idea? And I'm a pantser. I've always have been. And so I started writing this story because I needed to finish what they were like, those two of them at the end of the series. They were going to get together in that relationship of master and apprentice, give her a chance to actually do something with her life. And then I was like, okay, well, and then what happens? So this was my, and then this happened. Um, I was trying to. I don't write romance in general. I am not a romance writer. I write epic fantasy, um, and this happened to come out as a romance, a romantasy, basically, because that's the relationship that bloomed. Actually, when I finished writing it, my husband reads all of my stuff before I like as one of my beta readers, and I handed it to him, and I wrote, "Sorry." I actually told him, I'm sorry, I wrote a romance. Here you go. Good luck. But it came out really nice. The thing about it being a pantser though is I was going along and I don't quite know what they're going to do because I'm just going along with the story and they're telling me how it's going to happen, what's happening. And there was a moment about 2/3 of the way through that I had no idea if they were going to even get back together. Like I actually was wondering if she might go with the other guy, or just move on with her life because
Did
she
that. I did the same thing. I was reading the story and go, no. I mean, get a little tiny spoiler. I'm like, no. I mean, I could see it. I could see why it would have happened, but
yeah.
part of me was going, oh, I really hope that's not how this ends up.
And I didn't know either in that moment. I got down to it and I was like, you know what? She has every reason to walk away. She has she has the capacity to do so. He screwed up a few times here. Like he's dropped the ball. So it's kind of like, I don't know which way this is going to go.
Yeah.
It did turn out, I was happy with how it came out. It did kind of make sense and follow through. So I'm always cautious of that with like, you don't want to force the ending. You don't want to be like, it has to be the happily ever after with the two of them. It has to be. And so you force it into that situation, even if the story kind of went a different way. Now, if I was writing romance, you do, but I wasn't. I was writing a fantasy novel. So any direction was legitimate if that's what made sense for the characters and the situation. I'm glad with how it turned out. I'm really happy with how it turned out. But yeah, there was definitely that anxious, like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I'm a pantser totally, and my characters pretty much take over my life and
Yeah.
invade my dreams. And if I'm taking a walk, they're talking over plot, plot things. So anyway, I understand that challenge in terms, but sometimes it's so fun because you're kind of going along for the ride and you get to be surprised. Like hopefully your readers are going to be surprised. So I'm actually glad to be a pantser. It works for me. So
I love it. It's my favorite part of writing is when you write the thing, like just because you're going along and following the story, it all has to make sense. Because again, if I start plotting and I force it to do something, I feel like it's gonna maybe not make as much sense or if not flow as well. So I love it. Go along, go along. And then when you get to that part that you realize like you didn't even know that you had set that up like 4 chapters earlier, and yet it's just like
right.
perfect right there. I love that feeling. It's the
Yeah,
best thing.
I love our subconscious minds and how they work, right?
Yeah, layers going on in there.
So, um, I want to ask you about the other work that you've done. I know you have another series, so please tell us about that.
Yeah, so when I first started, I had a 3 book series, well, a standalone plus a duology, a young adult series. Dragon's Talon was my first book in 2019, and then Dragon's Voice and Soul Burner came out in the years following. And they're more lighthearted, more sword and sorcery, sort of fun fantasy with sarcastic dragons, lots of dragons. But those started me off. And then I wrote the 6 book series, Son of No Man, which covered the establishment of the kingdom in which the other books took place, where I was looking at the legend, right? This legend of the first king and how benevolent and amazing this first king was. And I wanted to know the real history because, again, I like to make my fantasy real. And, kingdoms are generally built by conquest and, powerful people, not because we all decided to get along nicely. So I wrote the actual series about what really happened and how this kingdom was established. And that's the 6 book series, Son of No Man. And it's all available. It was picked up by Four Horsemen Publishing out of Florida. So all 6 books are now out. They've been released over the last couple of years. And then I had to write his last name, also from Four Horsemen, just releasing that one just to wrap up some of the stories, although his last name is a standalone and more romance based as opposed to the epic fantasy, but obviously threads of both. Yeah, so that's the other works that I've done. I've got some other ones on the way because the editor already has finished with a 2 book series that instead of being an Espar, which is one part of the world of the tainted, it's such called because if you can imagine you're a wizard from the outside looking in on this world where there's magic that can destroy everything and it touches, this scary, scary dreamer magic. They call it tainted. Other parts of the world there, it does overlap with the original series, the young adult series, but there's a 2 book series coming out in 2025, 2026. That's Leon and Corlands. Different characters, although there, as I said, a little bit of overlap with the original series. And then I've got another book that I didn't mention before about a totally different world that's coming up too. So I'm branching out and leaving the world of the tainted soon and going to a completely different universe shortly
Wow.
as well. Although I think it'll be 2026 by the time it comes out.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. Congratulations on all of that. So my next question is, considering your career, how do you find time to write?
So I have to write. I swear it's an addiction. If I don't write, my brain just goes bibblety in the corner. I've tried not to write because at some point in my life I thought I should be all serious and grown up and not do this. But it was a bad idea. Don't do that. Having fun and playing and letting your mind just go for a romp into a fantasy world is hugely therapeutic. It's a balance for me compared to the busy science world and then turning it around and say yes, but now I'm going to go figure out how dragons fly and just go soaring with them. But most of my writing takes place at about 9 p.m. at night. And then I fall asleep at 10. So it's a very small window. But I also have 2 kids, 9 and 4. So they keep me busy during the rest of the time. So I work, I come home, I get the kids all organized, or the weekends we're running around with the kids. And then everybody's in bed. 9 p.m. is my writing time. So I finally can get in. And because I do it pretty much every day, it still means that I can be pretty prolific. I can do a lot with it. I'm always either editing something or writing something new or planning something or researching something or whatever. And as you mentioned as well, like when you're a pantser, you're just walking around and it's turning over in your head. And so I'm sitting there being like, that conversation that she's going to have with the Grand Archon and, has to figure out how to get out of the situation. I don't know how I'm getting her out yet. She's trapped right now. We'll figure it out. But it's still percolating at the back of your mind when you go for a walk or drive to work or sit in the shower or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing amount of work that you've accomplished in that writing hour. So good for you. I think we are out of time. That's everything I had on my list of questions. Thank you so much for coming today and talking with me about your work. Please go and check out her webpage, sign up for her email list, and then you'll get a notification. You can also pre-order his last name.
Yeah,
So
it's available for pre-order, releasing January 20th.
So do that, and then you'll just get it when it comes out, and you'll be happy you did. Thank you again for spending time with me today. I really enjoyed the book. I love the magic system. It was really intricate. So now I need to go back and read some of the other stuff leading up to this story. I'll add it to my list of things to do. And for all of you that are watching, I'll have all her links down in the chat box underneath the video here, so you can very easily click on that and find her. And thanks again, Dee. It was great talking with you. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.